Good evening and welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. My name is Joe LaPiccolo, your host for this week's newsletter. What is the West End Video Newsletter? Well, it's an offshoot of the West End Newsletter, which was started about 10 years ago by Jimmy Campano and Raymond Puppet, two former West Enders, who started off as a joke. And they sent a one-page newsletter to about 50 of their friends, and word of mouth spread. And today it goes to over 5,000 West End residents, former West End residents. It goes to 38 states, and it's a marvelous publication. It brings West Enders back together. If you want to know the history of the West End, over 30 years ago, our neighborhood was taken from us under the guise of urban renewal. And they did a terrible job on the West End of Boston. It was such a marvelous neighborhood, close-knit neighborhood. People of all nationalities and colors, and they all got along together as one. And you don't find that today. It's missing. And they destroyed it all, as I say, under the guise of urban renewal. And who is more qualified to tell us about this than a former West End resident? And we have today, our guest is Tony Capodilupo. Welcome to our show, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. It's good to see you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. And I was just by way of introduction to myself, in my relationship to the West End, I was born in the West End. Mm-hmm. And I lived in the West End for approximately 20 years of my life before we were forced out of it. Mm-hmm. So I lived through that whole horrifying process, and I understand all too well how we were propagandized and how we were disenfranchised. And I'll tell you, it's something that you live with every day. I mean, I'm really thankful to somebody like yourself who've kept that memory alive. It was wonderful because we were, as you say, a tightly knit group, community. Family. Yes,
yeah, right. A family is right. That's a good.
That's what it was.
Right.
We didn't need the federal government to tell us how to live together either, and it was just wonderful to be there.
What street did you live on?
I lived on Eaton Street, 11 Eaton Street. Which is went right into the Blackstone School, and went to St. Mary's.
St. Mary's.
And was an altar boy at St. Joe's with Father Powers, and I would do the 5:45 Mass. I did it for years, and I one day said to him, "My God, do I always have to do the 5:45?" And he said, "Anthony," he said, "you're one person I can depend on." And I said, "My God, I didn't know I'd be cursed with that, doing the 5:45 Mass."
But you stood with it. You learned how to do it.
Absolutely.
Right, right. And what schools did you go to?
I was at Boston Latin School, and up my junior year, finished my junior year, but we were about halfway through my junior year, we had to move, we had to go. So I finished my senior year at Brookline High School. It was a jarring experience for me. After that, Boston College, which is sort of up the road, and then got my master's at Yale University.
Right. We were discussing a little bit about, before we started the show tonight, about what an effect the taking of the West End had on you while you were in high school, the loss you had for the past couple of years. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, you know, the thing is that as a kid, you know, you don't quite believe any of it. You hear they're taking the West End. People were living there. And of course, it went on for many, many years. It was 5 years, actually, from the time we heard about it. And then it got very intense the last 3 years. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. You would hear that they're going to take your properties. And then, so people who owned it, they declared it a slum. Well, it was no more a slum. I mean,
exactly.
if you look at this picture that a good friend of mine brought me, you can see the kind of character it had, and it reflected in the West End. I mean, the only place really in Boston that may have been a little higher quality was Beacon Hill, but that was it. The West End was high, very high quality.
In fact, the housing stock, it starts at Beacon Hill,
That's
West
right.
End down into the North End. It's all the same housing stock.
Exactly.
And
In fact, the lower part of the hill was
considered the West End.
considered the West End.
Sure.
That's correct.
And even the West End had a little bit better property than the North End because they had bathrooms in their houses. In the North End, they had them outside the houses.
Absolutely.
So, but what we didn't have is political clout in those days. And the reason why I feel they didn't take the Beacon Hill is because of the political clout and being next to the State House. And the North End was rich in history with the Old North Church and Paul Revere's house. And they had more political clout than we had. And that's one of the reasons why they took the West End. Because location, how could you beat it, Tony?
Well, that's right. And if you look at Charles River Park, which looks out over the Charles River, that's a prime piece of real estate. That's I mean, we weren't so terribly aware of that as much as we were that it was our home, and it was. You know, we were busy people. It was a busy community. I was, this whole idea of the encroachment, of taking of the property, all of that kind of thing, was something we didn't quite believe up to the end. And right up to the end, in fact, my grandmother, who came over from Italy, I'll never forget, she had moved one other time before, and she had settled in the West End. And she would say to us, I can't move anymore. I'm not going to move anymore. In fact, I'm going to die right here. And we humored her. We didn't believe that. But you know something, Joe? She did die in the West End.
I bet she died of a broken heart.
She did. She died because you can't move old people around. That's where the humanity of the West End development, that was bereft of any humanity. And she was used to her home. She was used to using the handrail and so on in her advanced years, and she was used to it. She was comfortable with it. And you just don't tear people out of their homes.
And what was so sad about it is here you have the federal government telling you that you can't live where you want to live.
Yep.
You know? And not only that, it was a diversified, multi-ethnic, multi-racial community, like you say, one big family.
Yep. The likes of which is we've never seen, because then Boston became factionalized.
Right, and
you have the South Boston, and you have the North End, the Italian North End, and the Irish South Boston, and so on. Well, the West End referenced everybody.
All in one.
All in one, and it was wonderful. And we lived together, and we didn't need, as I said, we didn't need the federal government to tell us how to do that.
And you didn't care, or you didn't count how many Polish lived here, and how many black lived here, and how many Irish lived here. We didn't count faces. We loved each other. We took care of each other. And it doesn't matter who you were or what your status were, we're all one.
That's right.
And you won't find that. In fact... I
mean, we knew the differences.
Exactly.
But we learned to live with them, and that's what it's all about in this country, isn't it? I always thought it was.
And I don't know if you find this, Tony, but no matter where you go today, if you go different states and different countries, if you meet somebody from the West End, you get that automatic bond there.
Oh, yeah.
And they always say, I have never found a place to live like we had on the West End.
Comparable. No, there's nothing comparable.
And I've lived in a few other places, and so have you, and we miss it dearly.
That's right. That's right.
That's right. And one of the things that made the West End so wonderful were its community centers. And you belong to the West End House. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, the West End House was something that's really sorely missing in all communities today. And it was a boys' club. I forget his first name, Coles.
Allie Coles.
Allie Coles, and in fact, his son is my accountant today. And there isn't a time goes by when we have meetings that we don't discuss it, talk about it. But I always remember the Crusaders, and I was president of the Crusaders. I was a terrible basketball player. It's obvious. From my physics, I was never physically adept at anything like that. But I used to do what's called public declamation, or the declamation contest. Public declamation was Latin school, and it was a chance to get up in front, and I would always win them. So it was 10 points to win that, and it was 10 points for basketball. So it was the equivalent at the end. If whichever one of the clubs garnered the most points, they would get these wonderful jackets at the end of the year.
Oh, boy.
So I was an important guy because I would deliver 10 points every year. But we had the walk, we had the run. You had to participate in all of it. You know, and there was a wonderful bonding and things that happened in the West End that I've never seen again.
Tell us the story about the Nimoy debate. Leonard Nimoy, everybody knows Leonard Nimoy,
Yep.
and about the debate. Who beat him?
Well, my cousin Cyrus Del Vecchio was actually he began the whole thing. He was won a lot of declamation contests, and he's older than I am, so he was an example for the whole family in a sense, and so I've sort of followed along later on. But he did compete with Leonard Nimoy, and in fact beat him in a declamation contest at the West End. Yeah.
Yeah, we had Leonard Nimoy. He was here in Boston a couple of years ago, and then he mentioned that.
Yeah.
He says, "Son of a gun, he beat me."
That's right. Yeah.
And that's how Leonard Nimoy got his start, from the declamation contests and from the Elizabeth Peabody Playhouse.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. We did not have any drama. I didn't get into the drama until actually my senior year in high school, and then was president of the Dramatic Society at Boston College. And then I decided on graduation that I was going to go to I wanted to continue with drama, and wanted to go to the Yale Drama School.
And you became very successful, and we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
But we'll mention that because that's one of the longest running shows in the city, and we're going to go to the map right now. Tony, you brought along a map of how the West End looked and how the city of Boston looked in the character. How do you think that?
This is in the 30s. I don't know the exact date, but there's obviously the Southeast Expressway, which would go across here, is no longer there. This is Hanover Street. This is St. Leonard's, where Rose Kennedy was buried, just to give you where the service was for her.
Right.
And this is all, Hanover Street was one continuous street, as you can see. It went all the way down here. And this is the Sumner Tunnel, which would just to acclimate people. I had to look at this. You know, it's amazing. When a good friend of mine brought this up to my office and said, I think you should have this. And I looked at it and I said, what is that? I really didn't recognize it. And that's what can happen. And if you look closely at some of these buildings, the architectural character that have since, like a lot of these wharf buildings that have been rehabilitated, certainly could have been, that formula could have been applied to many of these buildings here. And they were strongly built. They had great flexibility, and it's a sin that we sort of bulldoze everything. You know, the mentality. It's the New York mentality. We don't preserve anything. We bulldoze them and put up these sterile walls of glass and steel, and that pretty much kills life in an urban setting like this.
That's a marvelous picture. Can you point with the pointer where the West End was?
The West End was in this area here. This is Cambridge Street.
Right.
This is Bowdoin Square, and this is Green Street that went down here. Here's the old Chardon Street. Here's the telephone building, and here's the courthouse.
And Old
the
Scully
West End,
Square.
you don't see a lot of the West End, but it's right. This is all of Old Scully Square, which went all the way through here.
And West End was prime location, surrounded by the Charles River on one side.
That's right. This is the Charles, which went around. I see. You know, this cuts it off here.
Right.
But around here, this is where the West End was.
And Cambridge Street?
This is the tip of it. And Cambridge Street
on the other side.
That's right.
And the North End and North Station on the other side.
That's right. North End and North Station is down in this area here.
Ideal location. They stole it from.
Oh, sure. Because of its juxtaposition to the water, the views, and looking over the Cambridge. That's a magnificent view, obviously. And of course, it was stolen.
And
I agree with that.
And some of the experts, like Robert Campbell from the Boston Globe, he's an architectural expert, and he points out the same thing to you: the quality and the history, and the magnificent buildings that just bulldozed.
That's right.
Under the guise of urban renewal.
That's right.
Today, that's not happening for the most part.
No.
Today, they're rehabilitating, and they could have done that years ago to us too.
That's right. That's right.
Forest.
Or you go the way of New York. Now, New York is another story, because New York is a kind of finite piece of land, and you know, this sort of great port and all of the things that sort of generated this massive building program, and it's a bedrock. You know, it's easy to build on. But here you had opportunities to do wonderful things with the city that just went by the boards. And anybody that ever says that the West End was somehow inferior, I know the city, lived in the city, and yes, I would agree with a lot of the North End being sort of inferior, because post-war a lot of stuff went up to accommodate, and it was done quickly. But But the West End, there was some real wonderful quality stuff there.
And the sad part about this whole thing, Tony, is I'm glad you mentioned it too, is the people who put up this plan were imported in from New York.
That's right.
All right?
Sure.
And this was tried in New York and it wasn't successful, and they come right into Boston and do the same thing all over again.
Yep.
And the sad part about it, again, is today you have a redevelopment director, again imported from New York, and again with these brilliant ideas. And, you know, I hope we could work together with these people and to try to bring us a resemblance back to the West End. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
They made us promises, and in fact, many years ago in the West End, they promised us that we could go back there. Do you remember
absolutely.
Do you remember the social workers coming to the homes? And
it's the tag phrase of affordable housing, which you know, it really meant to divert. There was no way that they were going to put those up. I mean, even with subsidies and the amount of money that went into it, first of all, the demolition of basically sound buildings. Although we were propagandized, I remember Poplar Street and McLean Street and all these some gorgeous homes there. And we were told that they were slums, that they're really on the verge of being condemned as buildings. That was a lie. That was a bold-faced lie. There was no way. There was some gorgeous appointments in some of those. Some wonderful. I remember McLean Street. My aunt lived in one of these buildings on McLean Street that had the most beautiful paneling. That would rival anything on Beacon. Absolutely, marble staircases.
And not only that, but they were so clean. I remember my mother and grandmother washing the steps once a week. You smell you smell the odor of pine going through the whole building, and they'd sweep and wash the side. You don't get that.
And then take that piece of newspaper and and put it down. It was wonderful.
You know, and we've been talking about bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
But what made the West End? The people.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Marvelous.
Absolutely.
Marvelous times we had.
Yeah, and the differences. You know, the differences is what attracts everybody. When you get sort of a homogeneous kind of area where all similar people live together, we don't get the same kind of stimulation that we got from the West End, where we had really a real broad cross-section of people. It was just great.
Okay, today, Tony, you ventured into a business that virtually your roots are from the West End and your upbringing, and you got these ideas from when you lived in the West End, and you started the theater lobby, which is located on Hanover Street in the North End today.
Right.
And can we have a close-up of this this newspaper clipping here? Can we have a real good close-up, a little closer? This is the theater lobby, and in big words, you'll see the words Nunsense. And Tony, tell us the history of Nunsense.
Nunsense has been running, it's really a wonderful show for Boston. It was written, it's been running in Boston for 9 years now.
It's the longest running...
It's the longest running musical in Boston theater history. The longest running play is Sheer Madness, and we're the longest running musical. And approximately a year ago, the author of Nunsense wrote a sequel called Nunsense 2. So I negotiated with the author. We moved Nunsense. It originally began at the Charles Playhouse, and about 4 years ago we moved it into Theater Lobby. And then I got the rights to Nunsense 2, and I produced that with Mike Frazier, and who had the rights to Nunsense, the original. And now we have them both running in repertory.
Oh, that's marvelous.
In the North End. And when I started out, talking about pioneers, everyone said, my God, a theater in the North End, that's anathema. There's no such thing as a theater in the North End. How could that possibly be? So we had to overcome a lot of that. And right now we're really doing so well with it. It's a wonderful show, wonderful Boston show. It's almost, if you have to liken it to a theatrical style, it's like a commedia dell'arte piece. It started in the cabarets of New York, and this guy wrote it and developed it, and then it was brought here and they developed it. It's many years. Dan Goggin, the author, many years with Felton Smith. They worked it when no one wanted it. No one was interested in it, and they achieved this wonderful commedia dell'arte piece. It really is, and our theater is built. It's theater in the round, and it reminds me of what it must be with the touring Italian companies. You know, when the Commedia period was just before Molière, and it influenced a lot of drama, and that they would all this stuff they would actually assimilate and pick up a lot of the local color, local politics, and so on, and reference it into the play, and it would actually change as they toured the Italian countryside. And I'm mindful when this play is running of what it must have been like, because it's like bleachers on four sides, and so people come and they actually can share in this experience. And I really, it was shot. I didn't quite know. You never really know how it's all going to work out. But I couldn't be happier. It's one
again.
of the
Where are you located?
Where everybody knows the European Restaurant. That's a building I own. And in fact, the place they were bowling alleys that the people from the West End and the North End, there were leagues that would bowl there, and it's a huge space that I turned into a theater. So it's right in the beginning of Hanover Street, right next door to the European Restaurant.
And what's the telephone number there in case somebody wants to get tickets?
227-9872, and they have the schedule for, if you've missed the original Nunsense, you can see it, and if you've seen the original Nunsense, even if you've seen it at the Charles, the compression in this theater, it's like a different show. And now we have Nunsense 2, the sequel.
Again, Jimmy, can we have a close-up of this? Here's a newspaper article about Nunsense and the raves and reviews about it. And it's quite unique, and I've seen it, and I loved it. Yeah. And it's quite musical, and
yes. It's a wonderful piece.
I urge everybody to go and visit it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Tony, while we were discussing the West End prior to coming on today, by the way, I want to remind everybody, this is the West End Video Newsletter, and my name is Joe Piccolo, your host. And here we have Tony Capodilupo, former West Ender, and we're discussing the history and what it was like growing up on the West End. And, well, we were discussing some of our program before. You had mentioned you equated some of the West End with something you were studying, or Macbeth, or one of those.
I had this notion, this thought. When I was at Boston College, I was fortunate to have played the role of Macbeth and King Lear, in fact. And Father Larkin, who was just one of the from Catholic University, directed it. But I was mindful of something in Macbeth when the witches prophesy to Macbeth about that no man born of woman will be his undoing, and he thinks that's a hollow ritual, that there is nothing to that. And at the end, when Macduff comes to kill him, it is said that he was untimely ripped from his mother's womb, which is an interesting, I felt, interesting simile here. And that's the way, I tell you, that's the way we all felt in the West End. I know I did. I can't speak for everybody, but that we were untimely ripped from the West End. I thought that, and there are severe repercussions from something like that.
Right.
And it's always those things, like Macbeth, that we don't see, that we don't until they actually confront us and say, "Oh my God, this is going to happen. This is what they said. This is what was prophesied 5 years prior to the West End coming down. We were told this, and here it happens, and it's the most horrifying. It's tragedy. It's what tragedy is all about."
Right, and the tragedy of all this is the human suffering too, of the widespread depressions and the widespread broken hearts that were with
absolutely.
And
absolutely.
These planners, these New York planners, they didn't care.
No, no, that's right. And you know, you can be very dispassionate about a lot of things when you're sitting in a boardroom and everything is sort of mapped out, and you create these little make-believe cities. You know, everything. You're applying formulas that oftentimes are not the formulas that apply to the people living there, and in fact, they very rarely are. It really should be people you know, it's always attributed to expertise. But that expertise has to be applied to the human factor. I hope, you know, now we're talking about this depression of the artery and all of this coming about with the north end. I hope, for the love of God, I hope we have learned something about the displacement and the harm that was generated in the taking of the West End. It was just horrible.
And you have the same similarities going on in the north end.
That's right. That's right. I mean, even though it's different, you know, we always say, well, it'll never happen again about the West End. That it's not going to happen again. We've already learned our lesson. But there's an insidious thing. There's something nefarious about it. It can happen. It may not be the same methodology, but the same thing can happen.
And it is happening.
And it is happening.
Right? And they said it never could happen again.
That's right.
And it's the bureaucratic thinking and
impersonal.
And geez, they lie right to your face too. They come in and tell you, oh, geez, this.
And by the way, this country has spoken about that. The country really is sick and tired of, I think, for the national election, that November election, is sick and tired of what the bureaucracies have handed down to us, you know, and how difficult it is. I mean, go to the registry sometime. Go anywhere in the city and try to get something of a city official to treat you like a human being. We're disenfranchised there. So people are really reacting to that.
Well, we hope that the mayor of the city is getting this message, because he wants people to come back to the city, and people come back to Boston, and he's scaring them away.
Absolutely.
And we can't have this. We can't have this.
It's not. It's a climate for business. It's a climate for incentives for people to come into the city. There has to be a sense of security, and there has to be leadership. And if that isn't there, all of it just becomes, you know, a hollow ritual again.
This has been great, Tony. It's been time flies by.
Is it? Are we
finished?
We're
coming to the end now. It's been wonderful having you here and giving us insight of what it was like to be a West Ender, or what it is like to be a West Ender, and what's happening in the North End.
That's right. You never cease to be a West Ender when you've spent 20 years of your growing years.
Thank you for being here today.
Quite
we enjoyed it. Well, they're coming to the end, and this has been the West End Video Newsletter. Good evening, and see you at the next West End Video Newsletter.